Tēnā koutou katoa and hello everybody. Welcome to the Lentil Intervention podcast. My name is Ben Adelberg and I'm coming to you from Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland.
And g'day, I'm Emma Strutt and I'm currently coming to you from Gungaloo country in Queensland. And before we dive into our conversation today, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community.
The Lentil Intervention is an Australasian educational and advocacy platform dedicated to raising awareness about the current climate and health crisis.
And on this podcast, we invite guests to chat about topics that will inspire you to take action to improve your own health and the health of the planet.
So please subscribe to and share this podcast and visit our website for the full show notes.
And don't forget to buy us a coffee if you'd like to support our work.
Season 2, episode 49, one away from the magical 50, and this is an express episode. We are going to be answering a number of questions from the presentation we delivered at the Doctors for the Environment Australia conference that was held mid-October. And you will have listened to that, hopefully, a few episodes back, numbered 44.
Our presentation on the day was titled Climate Solutions, Diet and Agriculture. Now, this is a huge topic, and we did have a few questions come through on the day that we just didn't have a chance to answer. We have also received a few questions from our listeners following the airing of that podcast episode. So today we are going to try our best to answer them.
Right, so we've pulled those few questions out of that Zoom chat, which we luckily did a quick screen grab. And then, of course, thank you very much to those of you that have submitted those questions, which means we have a few listeners, which is always good news.
We feel so
right. Absolutely. So, Emma, a lot of it is predominantly in your domain, which means I get off scot-free, which is good. So I'll take the lead. I'll put the questions through, and let's tackle some of these questions. And I think it's important to note to our listeners that, you know, a reminder that what we tend to say or present is more about stimulating conversation and getting people thinking rather than saying this is absolute. So I guess we're just covering ourselves a little bit, maybe. But yeah, I mean, that's really what it is, isn't it? I mean, you're going to do your best and we'll do our best, but
that's it. We're not experts at absolutely everything, but yes, we'll definitely try our best to answer these killer cues today.
All right, so question number 1, and I'll just read them out exactly how they came through. So first question, do we know how much food waste occurs before it reaches the supermarkets and our homes? Now, Emma, I know you covered some of this across, I think it was 3 slides, and mentioned a few of the following. So firstly, if food loss and waste were a country, it would be the 3rd largest greenhouse gas emitter in the world. And you did also, when looking at Australia specifically, you did say that each year we waste around 7.6 million tons of food, which equates to 312 kilograms per person, or 1 in 5 bags of groceries, which is an incredible amount. Now, you would have loved to have gone in deeper, but we were restricted with time. So, yeah, you've got more stats on this.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a very brief apology to the Kiwi listeners. This is Aussie-specific stats, but it's a similar story across the ditch. So the question was asking like how much food waste occurs before it reaches the supermarket. Unfortunately, though, I'm going to start with the household waste because that's actually what constitutes the largest proportion of waste across all of the stages of the supply chain. So households in 2021 in Australia have actually been responsible for over 2.4 million tonnes of food waste. And the majority of that household waste, regrettably, ends up in landfill, which of course compounds the environmental issues. But the other sectors don't get off scot-free here. So primary and manufacturing industries do have food waste problems of their own. I'm sure a lot of Aussies who watched that program War on Waste remembers the footage of a farmer burying like enormous amounts of his perfectly good banana crops because supermarkets didn't want to take them. They weren't quite looking the way they should be. So all of these silly cosmetic type benchmarks, they definitely need to change because we simply can't allow that amount of waste along the supply chain anymore. So primary industry has been responsible for about 1.6 million tonnes of food waste this year. And then the manufacturing industry has been responsible for about another 1.2 million tonnes. So big, big numbers. There are some key differences here, though, and I'm not in any way, shape, or form letting them off the hook here because that amount of waste shouldn't be happening in the first place. But within these two sectors, only a tiny portion of that actually ends up in landfill. So a lot of it is composted or used in other ways. So I think the take home message is that, across all sectors, things need to really be tightened up here. But what we do have control over is our personal waste at a household level. And there's big improvements that can be made in that sector.
So almost the message here is buy less
Yeah,
and consume it before you need to go. I mean, I know for me personally, I like to do my grocery shop once a week, but you might get to day 5 and then things aren't looking great, or maybe you bought too much, and then it's expired. So perhaps that's, when we talk about small changes we can make, perhaps that's one area is buy less and make
yeah.
sure you get through it.
Buy less, do a bit of planning around what meals you're actually going to be, consuming.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. Just a little bit more forethought, I think, can make a big difference.
Mm. Right, a lot to think about there already. Right, question number 2. A lot of the food in a plant based diet are currently produced by industrial ag using broadacre, monoculture, emissions producing, and soil degrading methods. Regenerative agriculture uses animals to assist plants pump carbon into soil. Do we need to change farming rather than diet so much? Wow, to start off, I would say it's a combination of both. First and foremost, we've got to remember, and this was covered in the presentation, is that we know that by comparison, livestock agriculture is the biggest emitter when it comes to emissions. It is a greater cause of deforestation, land degradation, the list goes on. And we know that 50% of habitable land is used for agriculture. So we got to remember that. We've also got to remember that, when people make comparisons of various plant-based milks and how much some of them, like almond, for instance, or rice and so on, use water, nothing comes close to how much water is used for producing dairy milk. So it's all relative. But plants are far from perfect either.
Yeah.
Emma?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you there. I think like our current farming methods aren't ideal. There's big improvements that we could make across the board, whether that be livestock farming or, crops. But I think um, traditionally with regen ag, there's been a really big focus on regenerative grazing using livestock. And I mean, look, that's great compared to what we're doing now. Anything's better than what we're doing now, right? But we simply can't feed the world that way. We won't have enough space to do so. And I think to be truly regenerative in every sense of the word, we need to address carbon sequestration while also freeing up land for rewilding. Regen ag tends to kind of gloss over these issues a little bit. And feeding the world that way, it wouldn't be achievable, as you've outlined. Like, we already use so much space for farming and animal products. Any way you slice it, whether they're regen or not, it's more resource intensive. So, feeding close to 10 billion people within planetary boundaries by 2050, any way you slice it, it needs to be a predominantly plant based diet. There's no getting around that.
Yeah. In an ideal world, maybe ideal for us, but say you removed livestock agriculture completely, then I would say there's more merit in then addressing how we're producing food. And we know that crops such as rice use an incredible amount of water. So that could then potentially be the next on the hit list, right? Because maybe by then water is even more precious. Monocultures are a problem. 100%. But we've also got to remember that a big chunk of those monoculture crops like corn and soy, again, where's that going? And we've covered some of those stats, and a big proportion goes towards feeding livestock. So you can address some of those other issues by addressing the biggest problem.
Yeah,
So I
absolutely.
think you've got to look at the first and foremost, the bigger problem before you kind of go down the ladder. And livestock is where the biggest gains can be made. So why not go there?
Exactly. Yep, 100%.
Okay. Question number 3. I'd like to know where fungi fit into these dietary stats, especially neglected Australian fungi, where very many unnamed but likely threatened with extinction due to biodiversity loss. So, a bit of a two-pronged question here. Mushrooms, from my perspective, get them on your plate. Love mushrooms. They are rich in selenium, a whole bunch of other minerals and vitamins as well. But Emma, your take on the
Yes.
importance of mushrooms?
Right. So I'm a huge, huge fan as well. I would love to see more people eating them across the board, whether they're plant based eaters or not. So, in terms of where they fit, even though they are actually biologically distinct from both plants and animals, in terms of nutritional guidelines, they're classified as veggie. They don't really fit there properly though, because they've got pretty unique and cool nutritional profiles that are generally found across multiple food groups. So what I mean by that is like they've got the flavonoids that you'd usually expect to get from the veggies, but then they've got beta glucan and niacin that you typically find in your grains. And then you've got, copper, selenium, even vitamin D if they've been exposed to some sunshine. And that's what you'd commonly associate with your, I'm doing air quotes here for the listeners, your protein category. Mushies have a really unique flavor profile as well. So they've got that umami savory taste. So really helpful for people who are actually transitioning away from meat and are missing that kind of flavor and texture profile. Um, so from a health point of view, fantastic to be eating. From an environmental point of view, so fungi is actually a really promising space for research. I mean, they've got much lower footprints than animal products do to start with. But there's also research into how they can help lock up carbon and sequester it away in our soils and help digest and recycle decaying food matter. Um, Even a particular type of fungi that's showing promise for digesting plastic. So it's a really promising, interesting space. But to address the question specifically in terms of neglected Australian fungi, I'm absolutely all for a more diverse food supply with more focus on traditional Australian foods. So I'm in agreement there. We've got some really cool mushrooms in Australia that I would love to see used more frequently. But the only thing I would say there is if you're not a mushroom expert, please don't go out and pick them yourselves. If you're not experienced at telling the difference between edible and poisonous species, because we've got a few poisonous ones in Australia too, and people have died from eating the wrong types of mushrooms because they look really similar to the edible varieties. So just be a little bit careful there, I would suppose.
Pro tip: you mentioned the vitamin D in mushrooms is sunbathe them before you cook them.
That's it.
So leave them out in the sun for a little bit, upside down. So you're exposing all those gills. So you're exposing the maximizing the exposure, and that's therefore you're actually maximizing the vitamin D. The other thing I just wanted to add, and I should probably done a little bit of research, but something I've been finding more common at kind of food festivals and expos and so on is mushrooms are so easy to grow because there's now these companies that literally sell a box
Mm,
or a log and and all you got to do is just feed it the right food of what it needs. I mean, each one's different, but super easy. Some you can, like these box types, you can literally leave them in your windowsill in the kitchen exposed to the sun, and you're just constantly cutting off the new growth. And
yeah,
so when people like to grow veggie gardens, or some might not be able to because they might not have the space or the land, mushrooms super easy, just need a bit of sun.
absolutely.
um,
Really efficient use of space. So it's a good
yeah,
one
so
to be
great
thinking.
trend, and I would say really worthwhile, exploring.
Yeah.
Right, so now this one's going to be a little bit of an open-end one, but how do you deal with statements like "I can't be vegetarian or vegan for health reasons"? Depends where it starts, where it comes from, really, doesn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
what's the underlying rationale for that statement? Is there a fear? Is there, yeah? I mean, where do you start with this?
That's it. And look, I know we briefly answered this at the conference, but I'm actually going to change up my answer a little bit to make it more applicable to a broader audience, not just health professionals this time. So, yeah, I mean, if it is a family member or a friend, I think the first thing to be mindful of is not being pushy about trying to get them to go plant based. I don't think that's going to help if you're pushing it upon anyone. But a lot of times, this kind of hesitancy, it kind of comes from a space of just not knowing enough about plant-based diets. I mean, there are a few medical conditions or intolerances or allergies that will require certain dietary tweaks. And that can make it a little bit more challenging on a plant-based diet at first as you're kind of getting your head around everything. And in those instances, I would really recommend the person see a dietitian or a qualified health professional that is quite savvy at plant based nutrition so they can work with them and address these issues. But generally speaking, I think most people would greatly benefit by moving towards a more plant centric diet. And for a lot of people, that starting point is not about changing everything overnight. It might be a step down approach. So starting with swaps that they're comfortable with, that they do feel is achievable, and then just progressing on from there. So I think most people could stand to move more towards that plant-based end of the spectrum, regardless of their current health situation.
And I think knowledge goes a long way as well. And you've mentioned, go see a dietitian. I would take that step further, and a dietitian that understands what it means to be on a plant-based diet,
Yeah, definitely.
because I think that's important. But it's the usual. I can't do it because I need protein, or I'm concerned I'm not going to get magnesium or iron, or things like that. So that's where that I guess knowledge is important. And if it's not coming from yourself, from doing the adequate research and reading from good, reliable sources, then actually speaking to a professional. But it also doesn't help that the issue can sometimes be exacerbated by news articles, because when vegans make the news headlines for the wrong reasons, this baby was found malnutritioned, or and if you dig deeper, it's because, well, they were only fed one food, or it
Exactly.
wasn't a planned diet. So that doesn't help. Is sometimes headlines, which obviously more clickbaity, more about sensationalizing something that is not really the norm. It's more the abnorm
Exactly.
circumstance.
100%. Really good point. Yep.
Okay, so those were the questions from the conference. There were a lot of statements, and we thought, do we go into those? But then we'll be here forever. This is an express step. So we explicitly took just the questions, but we do have listener questions. So here we go. Firstly, can you tell us the key actions that individuals can do again? So, Emma, I think that was relating to those last few slides that you touched on in that presentation. So perhaps we do a recap.
Yeah, so I might again like tweak it slightly just to make it more applicable to a wider audience, not just health professionals. But I think the key action that individuals can take, number one, is change what you're eating. So the more plant based and more unprocessed your diet is, it's going to be better for your health and better for your environmental footprint. If you're not ready to take that full leap just yet, start by eliminating the most resource intensive foods, which are the red meat products. And while you're doing that, you can also think of other easy swaps that you could be sneaking into. So, for example, it might be really easy for you to swap dairy milk for soy milk, or adding in some chickpeas to your curry rather than some chicken. Like it doesn't have to be hard. Just kind of crowd out your plate with all the good stuff, basically. um, but number two, it's not just about what you put on your plate. This is about getting this kind of information out there to people. So not enough people know yet how important our diets are in terms of the environment. So that's the second key action. I'd say as individuals, what we can do is talk about it. This might feel a little bit uncomfortable at first, but a reminder, we're basically now in code red for the planet. So get involved, support campaigns and movements that are putting this information out there. And I'd also say get a little bit political. So, tell the Australian and New Zealand governments that it's unacceptable not to sign up to the methane pledge. Write to your MP. Like, it's election time here in Australia very, very soon. Your vote counts, your voice counts. Like, this is a time to make some noise, or at least support those who do, I think.
Okay. And I would say, obviously this is a lot focused around diet and what we eat, but don't forget all the other little things you can do. That makes a big picture. And I'm going to plug one of our campaigns here, the Athletes for Nature. One of the drivers for that is, yes, we want to improve, physical activity, movement. There's all those health benefits that you get from being immersed in nature. But what that also does, it starts connecting the dots. And by being immersed in nature and starting to understand what's impacting nature, you start realizing that a big driver is the food on your plate.
Mm.
So that's an indirect way, but everything's interconnected. And we always say personal and planetary health are inextricably linked. So that's another example. So, yes, 100% food on your plate, but even just being in nature kind of starts drawing those dots.
Yeah.
Water quality, why are we losing little pockets of forests, wetlands, all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot more you can do that you don't realize can actually impact the bigger picture. Right. Gosh, we could go deep here, but we're trying to keep this short. Next one, Emma, I'm just going to hand this straight over to you. What are the 9 foods that are 70% of the foods eaten? Are any of them plants?
Okay, so this was a stat I mentioned in the presentation, but I was talking specifically about the biodiversity of plant crops. So they're all plants. We've actually got about 6,000 plant species cultivated for food, but only 9 of them contribute just shy of 70% of total production. So those 9 crops are sugarcane, maize, rice, wheat, potatoes, soybean, oil palm fruit, sugar beet, and cassava. So you can tell a couple of them are really healthy staples, but as you can probably guess from that list, a lot of these crops are actually destined to end up in junk food, which just reinforces the need to concentrate on whole plant foods, making up the majority of your diet. So we can start to move the dial a little bit in terms of biodiversity.
Yeah, that ultra processed food component. And it goes back to one of the slides I had in that presentation as well when we looked at the world soy production, because that comes up with, oh, you're destroying the Amazon forest and you're growing soy. Yes, but if you actually look at the statistics, 77% of soy is used for animal feed.
Mm.
But then also the other interesting bit was that I'm trying to do the maths here. So 19.2% of soy production globally is used, in air quotes, human food. But if you actually extract that, tofu, tempeh, soy milk is only 6.9%, which shows that there's a big proportion that goes towards ultra processed. And that's just soy alone, which featured, I think, number 4 or 5. But you had sugar at the top, you had corn, those are the fillers. Those are primary ingredients.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
yeah, it's a bit of a, are we consuming it or should we be consuming it? That's what it comes down to. All right. What are plant sources of B12? So firstly, B12, more of a microorganism found in soil and water, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's a unique vitamin in that it's actually produced by bacteria. So, found in soil and water, it's also synthesized in the guts of a number of animals, including humans, actually. But unfortunately for us, we produce it too far down our intestines to then absorb it. So, it's a bit of a useless process for us. Um, so, in terms of plant based sources, there were a number of earlier studies once we actually found out this vitamin exists, because this is one of our most recently discovered vitamins. And we did think that certain plant foods like tempeh and spirulina, certain mushrooms, for example, contain small amounts of B12. By and large, though, after further research was done, most of these were actually found to be inactive analogues rather than the bioactive forms, so not reliable sources. And I'd also just like to clear up a rumor that, if you left a little bit of dirt on your organic veggies and then consumed them, you'd likely get all the B12 you'd need. We do not have science to back that up, so please do not do that. The only reliable sources of B12 on a strict plant-based diet would be either supplements or fortified foods, my preference being a supplement here. This is arguably the most important vitamin for a strict plant-based eater to be aware of. Deficiency can be quite serious, so it's not something to muck around with. So take a supplement is my take-home message there.
And do you just want to elaborate on how much or the dosage? Because unfortunately, some of the health stores can, maybe sell a particular type, maybe the methylcobalamin, or the low dose is just too low. So maybe just a quick overview on what exactly we should be looking for.
Yeah, so I mean, the amount you need will change very, very slightly depending on what stage of life you're at. But generally speaking, when it comes to supplementation, the cyanocobalamin is the most shelf stable. So that's the one that I would recommend. I know a lot of people seem to have a bee in their bonnet about that, but that's the one I'd go for. You've got a few options if I'm just talking to like the normal adult population right now. You can either take higher doses a couple of times a week, so about 1,000 micrograms, 2 to 3 times a week if you wanted to, or you can take a smaller dose every day. So as long as it's over, well, technically you only need about 2.4 micrograms to reach the RDI, but I wouldn't recommend actually supplementing with something that low. Most of the ones that you can buy in shops will have about 100 micrograms or more. So if you're taking a lower dose like that, take it every day. But if you're taking a larger dose a couple times a week, for most people will be perfectly adequate.
Yeah, very, very important. Cool. Okay, let's move on. Can you comment on iron sources for vegans? Very relevant for GPs because we see lots of iron deficiency, especially in women. Lentils, that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, that's
Emma?
it. So lentils, yeah, it's number one because they've actually got a really good absorbable kind of iron called ferritin iron in it. But okay, so the type of iron in plant foods is called non-heme iron. It's not as readily absorbed by the body as the iron found in animal products, which is called heme iron. That's not necessarily a bad thing because the iron in animal products has been linked to a number of poor health outcomes. So when you're thinking about iron on a plant-based diet, you basically want to be thinking beans, greens, whole grains, nuts, and seeds. It's not just about what you eat, though. It's about what you absorb. So it pays to be a little bit mindful that there are foods that can help enhance absorption as well as hinder. So we actually covered this in a fair bit of detail in an Express episode earlier in the year. That was episode 12 of season 2. So if you'd like to hear a detailed breakdown, please go and take a listen to that. But basically, the most important enhancer to be aware of is vitamin C. So you always want to pair your iron rich foods with your vitamin C rich foods. So, when you're doing a lentil dish, put some broccoli or some capsicum in with it. Or when you're having your oatmeal, make sure that you've got some berries or some kiwi fruit or something like that on top. And then in terms of main inhibitors to be aware of, I think the number one to touch on would be phytates. So key thing here is to make sure your grains and your legumes are really well cooked. You don't want them crunchy or firm when you're eating them. And another big thing to be aware of is not to have tea or coffee with your meals. You want to move those away from your meals because they can really block a lot of iron being absorbed.
Very valid point. And red wine, perhaps as well. I think it's the tannins that you get in those drinks as well.
Yeah, so the
The
polyphenols.
coffee
Yep.
and yeah, yeah. Right. Okay. Any tips for ensuring a healthy diet for vegans on a low FODMAP diet?
Yeah, okay. So, this can seem quite confronting to people following a plant-based diet if they then need to do a FODMAP diet because you do have to kind of restrict the types of foods you're eating. I will say the FODMAP diet, it's a 3-phase dietary approach and it's not designed to stay on this type of diet long term. So in the elimination phase of the diet, you'd only need to stick to that for about 2 to 6 weeks. And it's more about symptom management. So again, I just really want to reinforce it's not a long-term diet to stick to. I did write an article on this for Nourish Magazine. I'll link that in the show notes if you want to read about this in more detail. But long story short, for vegans who are wanting to do a low FODMAP diet, I would strongly, strongly recommend doing that with the guidance of a dietitian so they can step you through those 3 phases.
Yeah, very important. I think the key take here is it's designed as an interim uh, sort of plan as opposed to something long term. Final question, and we didn't put it last; it just happened to come in last, but it's probably quite appropriate. Is do you think that if humans changed our food systems, we could live within planetary health boundaries? Very open-ended question.
It's a
The
big
question
question.
the question is, how much are we changing? Um, I think for me, it's when people talk about the benefits of regenerative agriculture or other forms of we can still have meat, we can still fish. I feel like okay, that could be a balanced approach, but we've gone so far down the one end of the spectrum that, to me, it's just too late to now take a balanced approach. We actually need to go to another end, the other end of the spectrum, to help give the chance for repair. And I think that would be my answers. That, yeah, we can make changes, but man, we're playing catch up. You
Yes.
know, let's talk about how much methane stays in the atmosphere for. So you can remove all the livestock now, but we're still going to suffer from the effects of methane for the next 20 years, 30, 40 years. So yeah,
Yeah,
I think
no,
more drastic changes are needed at the moment.
I completely agree. So, like the little changes here and there on an individual level, if you need to start with that, then do so, get the ball rolling in that way. But taking a step back and having a look at the whole system, we need huge, huge changes in order to get us to where we need to be. So, scientifically, like theoretically, it is possible, but like we need big changes to get us there in the time frame that we have. So again, like I mentioned this in the talk, but it's not just about eating a plant-based diet. It's also totally like rejigging our farming practices. We need to really, really reduce our food waste. Like the whole industry needs to change. So it's a big task. Hopefully, we can do it. But yeah, take home messages, small
And
little
again, it's
changes,
not just
not going to
food;
cut it.
it's consumption, it's
Yes,
energy use, it's all that.
absolutely.
It's a lot. You know, when we now talk about, replacing with something that's renewable, it's like, well, we can't replace what we have. We have too much, and so I mean,
Exactly.
that's a topic for another conversation, and we've covered those conversations in
Degrowth.
the past. 100%. But going back to the food part, if everyone, those that consume animal products, if everyone at least reduced their consumption, that would make a big difference. Of course, we have our ideals for other reasons, from health reasons and so on, to why not just eliminate it, and from ethical reasons and so on. But realistically, is the whole world going to go there? No. But there's more chance of trying to encourage people to reduce, and that can make a huge impact. And I think leading on from that, and it got brought up in a bit of the chat on that Zoom chat during our presentation, is what about cell generated, is that the right term, um, meat, cheese, other forms of dairy, cultured maybe is the right word. um, Emma, thoughts on that? Cultured meats, cultured cheese, cultured yogurt, cultured this, that, whatever.
Look, I think, and the whole food plant based people are going to come at me for this, but I think it is going to be part of the solution. We need all the help we can get basically to get us to where we need to be.
From an
It's
environmental point of
from
view,
an
for
environmental
sure.
point of view,
Yeah,
100%. From a
yeah.
nutritional point of view, there's still a lot of questions that remain there. So I know some people are saying we'll get to the stage where we can actually, alter the amount of saturated fat in the lab grown red meat, for example, or decrease the amount of heme that's in it to make it slightly better from a health perspective. And that's great for the people that are just going to refuse to give up their meat. But for the vast majority of people, number one, we can't wait around for this to actually get to the stage where it's scalable. We need to start making changes yesterday. So for those of us who actually have the nutritional literacy and the capacity to do so, plant-based diet is the way forward, in my personal opinion.
I think the Lentil intervention's opinion.
Yeah, okay.
So, on that note, we hope this has been of benefit to you. We certainly want to encourage our listeners at any time, if you have questions, and it can be post a guest that we've interviewed, or it could just be, generally, more so nutrition, perhaps. Don't throw us too many curly questions, but send them to us, either via social media, email it to us, doesn't matter. Get them to us. If we find we have a number of questions from our listeners, we'll do another express sep. We're here to provide information. It's not always going to come from interviews. We want it to come from you as well. And sometimes, and we have done in the past, soy was a bit of a hot topic. So we went and recruited Dr. Mark Messina. And we'll do that again with other guests. So if any time you have any questions, send them through. Um, one of us might get back to you with the direct answer, or we might wait for an episode. So, on that note, thank you so much for listening, and till the next time.
Thank you for listening to the Lentil Intervention Podcast. If you found this interesting, make sure you subscribe and share it with your friends.